There's been a lot of talk about Xbox adding support for other stores on Xbox devices, which could include both a home console and a handheld. With Microsoft seemingly struggling to get mindshare on Windows for its game distribution platform over Steam, is there a risk that such a move benefits Valve more than it does Microsoft? Surely Microsoft wants to be distributing its own games and third party to ensure it can still maximize profits. However, consumers overwhelmingly have backed Steam when given the option. Will Microsoft need to try to enter a revenue share to make this work? Or how else do they maximize their commercials? Is there likely to be enough margins on the software and maybe hardware that handing over a percentage of sales to Valve still makes the endeavor worthwhile? This seems particularly noteworthy when margins on console hardware tend to be low or non-existent, and revenue from software sales and distribution making up the gap. John, this is an interesting one, right? Because we've had these indications from Phil that they're going to allow competitor stores to run on Xbox hardware. And there is not really any sort of idea why they're doing that other than the fact that PlayStation software will never come to Xbox hardware. But that seems like a rather extreme way of tackling that. I'm curious as to what the strategy is here. All I can think from my perspective is that they're looking forward to a future where closed marketplaces on dedicated hardware are no longer allowed by the likes of the EU and whatnot. We're seeing a lot of movement in digital markets where Apple are being forced, and indeed Google are being forced to open up their devices to other marketplaces. But it does seem slightly odd that Microsoft would want to get ahead of the trend here. What do you think about this?
I mean, fundamentally, I'm sure they would obviously prefer that their users stick to their store and or Game Pass. But if they're really serious about making Xbox a PC and leveraging the PC, they kind of don't have any other choice, right? Like, they could still make it a lockdown platform, but then it would just kind of be the same thing that it was before. Whereas if it is a proper PC experience with options, I suppose that the way I might look at it is, so you look at the Steam Deck, right? You can install other stores on there. There's ways to do it. You can get Windows on there. You have full freedom of a PC, but it's not exactly that convenient to do so, is it? No. Right? Like, Steam is the way to go. I'd imagine on the Xbox device, if depending on how it's put together, dropping out to a desktop and doing something else from there is possible, but perhaps still ultimately less convenient, especially on the go and handheld mode, to the point where users would just sort of naturally gravitate towards using the Xbox store versus that, right? Like, I assume that it would be more along those lines rather than getting into any sort of weird revenue sharing stuff. And I mean, if what we're thinking they might do, which is the idea of like moving away from this specific platform, the idea is that it's just Xbox games are now PC games, and you're no longer crafting specific versions, which means it's not going through the normal checks and the TRC stuff or whatever that we've always seen in consoles. It's a PC version. And it still needs to be open for that platform to really become what a PC is. But like the Steam Deck, there's certainly ways to keep people wanting to stick to whatever software they have proprietarily installed on there.
Right.
I think the other thing, of course, is that Microsoft is going to have all their games on Steam, and maybe you're particularly wedded. Yeah, maybe you're particularly wedded to the Steam ecosystem, but you'd quite like an Xbox piece of hardware. Microsoft will still get their money. They'll get less of it, of course, but ultimately they want to make their platform more inclusive, and their platform isn't just the Xbox app anymore, which is an interesting business strategy. But I think they're looking ahead and looking at what today's younger gamers are doing with their devices, and typically they just, I think Phil has actually said it, they just want to be able to play their games on whatever they've got available. And I guess that would also encompass different storefronts as well.
They'd also have to allow you to install the Sony app, of course.
Oh, yes.
If you want to play the hottest hits from Sony on the PC. So you're going to have that layers there. There's layers.
Yeah, how many layers?
You can earn trophies on your Xbox.
Oh. Yeah, I must admit the concept of having, launcher hell on a console. isn't particularly great, is it? Alex, what do you think about this? I mean, generally, do you welcome this idea of Xbox and becoming a part of what is essentially the PC ecosystem, assuming they can
Yeah.
actually make a decent app?
I mean, yeah, I mean, because I would love the beneficial aspects of what that could bring to the PC ecosystem, a greater level of standardization for quality, because I don't think it would be just as Wild West. I don't think so. I think there would be a bit more of Microsoft creating profiles for games and things like that. There's going to be something different about it that makes it more intuitive. It'll be changing of UI, UX. I also think it'll make PC gaming better then, because you're going to have to solve some fundamental issues there to get games running well, even on an expensive, I'm presuming the next Xbox is expensive if PS5 Pro is any sort of indication of the way hardware costs are going. They still want it to run better, but without having the benefit of the dedicated QA pass that a console game would get. So they're going to have to work on that, and all these things I think are only positive. Regarding the stores, like you said, Rich, I think if someone's buying an Xbox, they're already going to be making now profit off the box anyway, which is what they're happy with. And the icing on the cake will be if the user, like John says, realizes that the user experience is much faster, ergonomic, and all these things to just keep within the Microsoft ecosystem. I don't think Microsoft's going to do the Apple thing where they make it like actively user hostile to start using other services. But I think they would just make it would just be like in some sort of kind of really not too great PC kind of way of doing things. Not something that doesn't lend itself too well to a controller necessarily. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I imagine they would make it not as easy to do as just downloading a game off of Game Pass or something like that.
Mm-hmm.